And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Pam McDonald, who's the Director of Ontario Operations from CFIA, to come and speak to us about what we can expect in inspections in this year and coming years. So please, a big round of applause for Pam.
All right. I've successfully navigated the stairs in high heels, so that's a win. Let me just check my slides. All right. So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to help kick off your event today, and thanks for all of you for being here. I think one of the things that CFIA looks for from industry is a commitment to food safety, and some of that is, as Glenford talked about, is educating yourself, keeping up to speed on the various changes and things that are happening both in government but also around the world as things continue to evolve and change. So thank you for taking the time out of your, no doubt, very busy days to be here today, and I hope I can hopefully answer some questions, shed some light on how to work with your CFIA inspector, and maybe make us a little less scary, because yes, we are regulators, but we also do provide a service, both to industry and to Canadians, and so we do want to have successful and positive interactions with all of you. I am going to go through just some very quick regulatory and program changes, but primarily going to talk about kind of what to expect from your inspector whenever you have them arrive at your facility with some of these things, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end to be able to take some of your questions. So in terms of changes related to food product innovation, these are non-mandatory changes. So we tried to, as a regulator, make the legislation a little bit more flexible in order to allow industry opportunity to use different container sizes. We made some changes to the test market authorization process so that way it's an equal playing field, and to allow access for new products to be able to come and have access to the Canadian market. So I think this is somewhat old news, and we're probably not going to get a ton of visits from CFIA whenever it comes to these things because they are non-mandatory. Our inspectors perform their work based on risk primarily, so non-mandatory labeling regulations, while important for consumers, and we certainly want to make sure that there's nothing false and misleading happening out there in the labeling space, but you're not going to see an annual visit from us based on one of these changes. Now, food labeling modernization, I think most affectionately known as front of package labeling, is something that has been introduced. Health Canada has the lead in terms of speaking to the regulatory aspects of it, answering questions on that aspect, and then CFIA, we're the compliance and enforcement people. So right now, as most of you are probably aware, we're in a period of transition. Industry has until the end of 2025 in order to be able to use up their packaging, make any adjustments if their products fall under this sector to their labels in order to make sure that they're compliant. For our inspectors at CFIA, we are able to answer questions when it comes to, what does compliance and enforcement mean? Our inspectors are in the process of themselves getting comfortable with these changes, and labeling is complicated. So once upon a time, many years ago, I was a labeling inspector. I did really like it, in part because it's just kind of like a really complicated puzzle, and whenever you finally figure out all the pieces, you feel really good about it. But it is tricky, and going through and trying to figure out all of the pieces in order to meet the regulations, it takes a lot of time. And that's where I think the relationship between industry and their inspector can really be helpful, because you probably do have a lot of questions. The inspector will have a lot of questions. And so sit down and talk about them together, and talk about what is your plan. We have this many products. It's going to take us this amount of time to use up our packaging. Here's what we have in terms of our schematics. Let us in the know on some of those items, so that way we can hopefully help you get ahead of this one, and that it's not January 1st, 2026, and then suddenly you're nervous about the inspector coming and their next visit and what that might look like. Supplemental foods has been a fun one for CFIA, in part because I don't know if folks get all the recall alerts, but we had a lot of activity last year over caffeinated energy drinks. So lots of interesting products coming into Canada. I think that we didn't maybe expect the volume that we saw. So this regulatory change just allows certain products to be able to come in with approved supplemental ingredients. Right now, our inspectors are following up on these types of issues based on complaints. So we are not, this isn't part of our planned inspection work, we call it. So when we receive a consumer complaint due to a health risk or someone concerned about something that they see on the labeling, our inspectors are going to follow up. So probably not a huge sector of the audience here are implicated by this, but it was a pretty significant change, at least in the CFIA space, because there was a number of products that we weren't used to seeing being brought into Canada that we had to take a look at. Some of the ingredients were new and had some very interesting interactions with each other that had us working closely with Health Canada on the health risk assessment and taking regulatory action. We are in a period of consultation where we're opening up the opportunity to industry to be able to provide us feedback on the Safe Food for Canadians Act. So every 5 years, it's actually written into the legislation that we will reach out and allow this opportunity for industry, the public, anyone really, to comment. And so we are really encouraging all of you to take some time. The website actually has a consultation document that takes you through a number of questions. And this is an opportunity for us to see, did we hit the mark whenever it comes to this legislation? It was new for Canada and for us as a regulator to have outcome-based regulations. And so did we achieve the goal? Is food safer? Are consumers feeling protected? Does outcome-based legislation give you the flexibility that you as industry were looking for? So your local inspector is probably not going to be able to tell you all the ins and outs of how to navigate that. This is a very national space. We have a working group. So it's our audit and evaluation branch that are kind of leading this, and then members of teams in the different branches will be going through the feedback. But I do encourage you to provide your feedback. I do want to say, though, it is just about the Act. So there are probably lots of pieces of the safe food regulations that folks have comments on. This is purely about the Act itself, and then opportunity to discuss the regulations will probably come later whenever we do a review there. Importer risk assessment model. So this is not a regulatory change, this is a program change. We've had the establishment risk assess model for a number of years, and part of our modernization journey that CFIA has been on for the last 12 years, it's been taking a little while, has been to try and have modernized legislation, a single inspection program, but also then to be able to divert our inspectors and use our resources to the areas of greatest risk. So we've been able to roll that out domestically to all of our food programs, and now we're looking to apply it in the importer space. And so with imports, there's tons of different food products coming into the country, and so this model allows us to be able to look and categorize all of those products using the type of food product is, so the inherent risk that a certain product just poses because of what it is or who is going to be consuming it, then the compliance history, the mitigating factors that a company will use to try and mitigate that risk, and then we are able to roll that up into a categorization. So category 1 will be the highest risk and where importers are most likely going to see inspectors coming in doing an inspection, because these are imported products. They're obviously not going to be able to see the full production. They're going to be looking at very specific sub-elements of the preventative control plan, but you would see those inspectors on an annual basis if you had a product that fell into the category risk 1. So there's a really good source of information on our website about this if you happen to be an importer and are curious. In most cases, just based on the volume, our inspectors are going to be focusing really on those category 1, maybe 2 products, unless, of course, we see a food safety risk that causes us to do some follow-up there. It's the start of a fiscal year for us, so April 1st, we're April 1st to end of May, which means every year our programs and policy branch, of which I'm part of operations, so I'm purely the inspectorate, but our colleagues in programs and policy branch publish what we call the program's highlights and priority. So this is the time of year whenever we take a look as an inspectorate and say, okay, what are we needing to complete this year in addition, or that may be different from last year? And so what you see on the screen are the categories and the types of inspections that we do. Permissions are usually, those are all associated with your SFCR license. And so an activity linked to that would be, okay, you applied for your license and you ticked every single box. Do you actually do all those activities? And so our inspectors are going to be working with companies just to verify you're licensed for a lot of things. That means you need to have a preventive control plan for all those things. If you don't actually do them, maybe let's take some of those activities off. It doesn't change your flexibility to be able to do those things in the future, but we want to try and focus and not have to look or ask you for things that you don't have because you're not actually performing those functions. We do regular inspections, so our planned inspections, folks would see us there for preventive control inspections. We may do sampling activities, so you may only ever see us, depending on the type of company you have, to do sampling. Incident response, that's whenever we're following up on a complaint. So a consumer has complained, a trade complaint, so one company complaining against the other, and then a regulatory response, so where we find out there's a port of entry violation or something where we need to take actual action, recall something to take a product off of the market. Knowing what your inspector is there to do under these categories can be helpful for you in terms of managing, okay, what kind of information might they be looking for? How much time am I going to need to make available for the inspector in terms of to be able to do what they need to do to make sure that I'm compliant, but also to make sure that this goes well overall. And so ask that question. What are you here for? What was the trigger? That's okay. It's okay to ask us that. It doesn't offend the inspector, doesn't set us off on a bad path. It actually is just helping manage expectations, I think, on both sides of things for all of you. This year, we will continue with our food misrepresentation, so our battle against food fraud activities will continue. I think folks have probably seen there's been a lot of articles in the media lately about shrinkflation, lots of articles, podcasts, and such about how increasing food costs and such. So CFIA will be performing inspection work in this space to take a look at mostly high-value products and validate and verify that they are what they say they are. So this is going to look like either sampling, where we will send our inspectors out to the marketplace and collect samples of specific commodities. We're not sampling everything. So historically, we've looked at things like honey, special oils, and the reports are always published annually on our website, so if folks are curious about what the outcome of that is, you're able to look. And then what we call a commodity inspection, so that's where we're actually looking at the product. So we're going to be looking at the product, looking at the label. Is it what it says it is? And does it follow the regulations, very much from a misrepresentation lens? We do sometimes do some special projects. So last year, we had a focus on enoki mushrooms. And how that sometimes happens is whenever we start to see trends in the food safety space. So we saw a lot of recalls for imported enoki mushrooms due to listeria. And we really needed to do some additional inspection work to collect the information and figure out what's going on here. Why are we seeing so much listeria in imported mushrooms versus what is done domestically, what are the differences there? So we will send our inspectors out to the places that sell or import these to see, okay, what are the processes that we have in place? Are there any additional restrictions that need to happen? So our inspectors will be the ones that will perform the inspection, they will do a verification or preventative control plan. That information then goes to our programs and policy branch and our colleagues in science who may adjust the program requirements. So with romaine lettuce, we saw additional requirements for certificates of analysis where we wanted to see things being tested for E. coli before they ever come into the country. And that's in part because we were seeing instances where, Christmas time, people want to make Caesar salad for their families. There's no romaine lettuce. It's all been recalled because of E. coli. So we're trying to leverage the data, the information we have, collect the information, and make sure the requirements that we're asking industry to meet allow us to be able to adjust the risk. So those are sometimes in-year adjustments. They're things that we do based on trends we're seeing. And again, recall data is a really good source for us of that. You may hear us, if folks go to different meetings and sessions, we are really focusing on our change management approach. And so certainly outwardly with industry, whenever we have any kind of change, we're trying to make sure industry has a period of time for transition to make this as painless as possible, as any change to regulations can possibly be. But internally, we've recognized the need to make sure that we're giving our own people that same opportunity. And so you may hear us talking about the change management strategy, and not too long ago, we recently went through an exercise where, for our meat inspectors, we changed their inspection approach. And there was quite a significant change management strategy there, where we were trying to do it in pieces, trying to give the inspectors time to get the training that they needed, to understand what they needed to do, so that way when you see them, they're prepared, and they can help guide you through anything that you may need to know if the change impacts you. And so we're really trying to focus on giving our inspectors that support that is needed, so that way when you ask them a question, they know where to go, or they have the answer for you. This means that sometimes the transition periods can be a little bit long, and so I talked about the front of pack labeling. There's a change management piece for our staff there, just in terms of the labeling inspection and the time that they will need to allow to be able to go through that. We've recognized that that is an important investment that we need to make in our people, and we have a lot of new inspection staff that we've brought in over the last 5 years. The pandemic meant a lot of people retired, moved on, did different things, and so we've established solid learning pathways for our inspectors, and what we're hoping you see is a knowledgeable inspector that can work with you through the process. Yes, we're there to make sure that you're compliant, so yeah, there's going to be times whenever we have to say, that doesn't meet our regulations, you're going to have to address that, but we want that to still be a useful conversation, not just a, no, you can't do that, and that's the end of it. We want our inspectors to be able to feel comfortable and supported by our organization to explain what their expectations are. We're not going to be able to tell you what to do to fix it. That's not our responsibility, but we're not trying to create this invisible target. We want to be able to explain clearly what we're looking for, so that way you can meet those expectations. The other thing that we're doing to support our inspectors, and again, it's always existed to an extent, but maybe hasn't been fully utilized in the way that we could, is internally we have what we call the advisory continuum. So at the very local level, inspectors have access to inspection advisors that are going to be our subject matter experts, whether it be for animal health, for meat. And so those are the folks that they're going to go to when they have a question for something that exists in our guidance or exists in our procedures. Whenever there's something new and that local advisor doesn't know, we have folks at the provincial, the area level. So in Ontario, we have a team of specialists who have a network across the country that can say, okay, our inspector has heard something or seen something new, industry has a question, we're not totally sure, has anybody else seen this? If not, then it's something that goes to our national team that we need to address at a more national level. And the reason we're really trying to emphasize this is one of the questions or the comments that we often hear from industry is about consistency, that the inspectors are not consistently applying the regulation, or the inspectors may not be consistently following the policy. We train our inspectors to follow a consistent inspection process and to follow a consistent number of steps whenever it comes to making decisions. The outcome of the decision may not always be the same, and that's because every single one of you work for companies that have different processes. So what we want to make sure is that you know what to expect whenever we are coming to visit, to do an inspection. You know the steps that we are going to follow, what the inspector is going to use to make their decision, and that way that's transparent. But sometimes there are nuances to situations, and the inspector has to make the decision based on the information that they have in front of them and that you've given them. And so we're trying to equip them with access to experts for those special, unique situations, because things do change. Industry is evolving very quickly. We like to see that level of innovation, but it means that then we have to make sure we can support our inspectors to get up to speed and to learn new things quickly as well. Hopefully folks are familiar with CFIA. It does still exist. It is there to be able to help answer questions from industry on food. A lot of the questions that they do receive are on the labeling space. I know from past opportunities I've had to speak, the service timelines sometimes are much longer than what industry would like. And I can say that that's because sometimes the questions are extremely complicated. And so, when you have a lawyer asking a question about regulations, it takes a bit of time for us to be able to decipher and collect all the information we need to be able to give an answer. We are working on leading this process and trying to get that service standard down, because I think the last time I spoke, it was about 21 days for our very, very complex questions, which can be a long time, especially if there's something fairly urgent. So that the Ask CFI team works for me in my role nationally, as I have the ability to try and get that process going a little bit smoother with our colleagues in PBB, so that we can hopefully get industry their answers a little bit faster than our 21 days. And then before I open it up to questions, and I'm almost there, I promise, I did want to spend a bit of time just talking about developing a relationship with your inspectors. And I think, in operations branch and specifically in Ontario, we really do want to see a solid relationship between industry and the inspectors. It's why we enjoy coming and speaking at sessions like this, to have an opportunity to meet with you, to hear your questions, hear what you're experiencing out there, what your reality is. And I think for our inspectors, they're where the boots hit the ground, the rubber hits the road. And they're there to verify that you're in compliance with regulations, absolutely. But they need your information. They need to understand your process. And so, have that relationship, talk about what you're trying to accomplish. When you are going to or thinking of doing something new, engage your inspector early on, as opposed to, at the next annual inspection or the next time they come around. We do have badges, but we're not the food police. And I think I said that the last time I was in a room with Glenford. So the badges are there to help identify us, so that you know that you have a real CFIA inspector in front of you. It's not to be a signal that we're here to give you a ticket if you do something wrong. So I want to encourage you to really get to know your inspector. For some businesses, if you're in the meat sector, you see your inspector every day. Very easy to establish that relationship. If you work in some of the other commodities where your product may be a little bit lower risk, you may only see us annually. Maybe you only see us every couple of years. So I understand that it could be a little bit nerve-wracking when you get the call from the inspector that you're going to be coming by, or if the inspector happens to stop in. But do what you would normally do if you were at a session just like this, meeting new people. Get to know them, explain your process, find out what they need to do while they're there, so that way you can give them the information that they need. And then whenever they finish their inspection and they give you your report, if you have questions, ask them. The inspectors, they are very knowledgeable, they are very competent, and they don't mind answering questions. We would rather sit down with you and go through and explain it than have you struggle for however long a period of time, and then when we do our follow-up inspection, find out, okay, you didn't get to where you needed to be. And I think there are times, inspectors have a certain amount of discretion when it comes to applying the regulations for some things. And so, that's the value in the conversation, the relationship, is to understand where you're at and what you're trying to get to. Yes, I am trying to get to compliance. I've had this obstacle. The pandemic, as much as it was a couple years ago, we saw a lot of that. And I think there was flexibility given to be able to help industry, given the challenges we were facing. Sometimes those conversations need to escalate to a higher level. It doesn't mean that the inspector is going to be offended. Sometimes you need to talk to their inspection manager. Sometimes you need to talk to the director. I've met some of the folks in this room because I needed to get involved, because there was a decision made elsewhere in CFIA that the inspectors have to enforce, and maybe we need to talk about what it means for you. And so those conversations happen. I think there's a lot of successful results that happen as a result of them. And so I encourage you to have that relationship. And if you are still feeling uncomfortable, if you're still not satisfied, then ask to speak to a manager with the inspector to talk about it a bit further. Most of our inspectors would offer that. But I do want to provide a reassurance that there is a whole hierarchy there to help, because sometimes things get really complicated. Some things happen that are very urgent, and we are there to try and help achieve the same objective, I think, that we're all here for, which is safe and compliant food. So with that segue, maybe I will turn it over for questions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Pam. That was extraordinary. I want to just say to you, it's a great privilege to have candor from the regulator to come in and talk about relationships and transparency and consistency in the inspection relationship. it's really difficult to manage the idea of the inspector as someone who's helping you work towards compliance, but also it's like kind of a food cop in some ways. And you can see the discomfort when people are being inspected. And so to have you come here and speak candidly to us is really wonderful. I'd like to open the floor to questions. I know it's early in the day, but this is a great opportunity. There's so much happening. This is a really worthwhile opportunity.
I think the mic is supposed to just stay at that table, I heard, or something.
Why do you think that? Pam, thank you for the presentation to begin with. One of the things the poultry industry is facing in Canada right now is the need to reduce Salmonella and Campylobacter in product, which we fully support at the industry level. But what also has been expected of us is to take corrective actions when we are working under a supply chain management program where you don't have jurisdiction on farm, or neither do we. Do you have any insights or thoughts about how we can get corrective actions done back further into the supply chain?
That is a tough first question to start with. Thanks for that, Ron. We sit down regularly with the national poultry associations. Even influenza over the last couple of years has had us having those regular conversations. I think it's allowed us to establish really good working relationships with the other levels of government and folks involved. And so I think we probably need to bring it to those tables to try and see, okay, who has responsibility for what in this system, and how can we maybe connect the dots to make this a little more practical, I guess. Because I'm sure industry wants to get where they need to go, and if it were simple, you would have done it yesterday. So it is complicated, and probably that's where sometimes CFIA can bring the right people to the table to say, okay, how can we do this? And so that's what I would recommend. It's not a very local conversation, I think, just because it is such a broad industry issue.
Hi, Pam. Thank
Hi.
you. Just a comment. Number one, like you had mentioned, the relationship with the inspectors, and I would like to let you know that in Ontario, anyways, in the meat program, I think we have seen an increase in cooperation and communication, and we appreciate that. Question I have for you is about the import risk assessment model. So when you're doing categorization, meat products automatically are slated for import inspection anyway. Is that going to change under that model? No.
No, so meat will be exempt from RA, at least
Okay.
for now.
Because that wasn't really clear when the messaging
Right.
came out to all of the importers. So, and then the other comment would be, we've seen a couple of things go into the IB, what is it, the information system, when they send out the notices. So like there's been things that have been sent out to industry that are based on somebody in CFIA, it appears, read a regulation in Europe and said, hey, that sounds really great. We're going to write that up and include it, and we're just going to put it out into an instruction to industry. And in the case of poultry, that's resulted in some really major issues because it wasn't related back to the Canadian industry, and it doesn't apply here, but it's been made into an enforceable action against the industry. Is there a stopgap in Ottawa to review things before they get released to say, hey, does that even work in the Canadian industry?
There is. It doesn't always work perfectly, to be perfectly honest and candid. So part of my team, so I am, right now I'm acting as the executive director for the inspection support director. So it's a really long title, but basically I have the national specialists that the inspectors will go to whenever they find a really bizarre scenario. And so our team is meant to work with programs and policy and our international affairs branch to make sure that anything that is going to go out to industry or anything that the inspectors need to do differently, that we're at the table with them to make sure that it makes sense and can be actually operationalized. So those conversations are meant to happen. We have tables for them to happen, but then sometimes you have a one-off and something sneaks through, and then that creates a whole lot of excitement. There is nothing that irritates my colleagues in Ontario more than when industry finds out about something before their inspectors do. And so we're really trying to make sure that before anything goes out, that we have eyes on it. So we do have a process. It's not perfect. And we really appreciate and certainly don't use it as a quality control measure, but when industry does come to us to say, wait a minute, that's where the hierarchy that I talked about with the inspector, like talking to your inspector, saying that this just came out, this is not good, this doesn't make sense, and running it up the flagpole so we can correct it. We don't like when those scenarios happen, but they do, and I think that's a positive about good government, is that we are open to hearing about it and then having the conversation and correcting it. Anybody else?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from our online audience. What would you say is the absolute biggest hurdle you foresee for food inspections in Ontario?
Well, I think in general, there are not enough inspectors versus companies across the country. So, that is why we use the risk-based approach. So we can't be everywhere, and having a CFIA inspector come to a facility doesn't guarantee that everything is going to be safe and perfect. It's a partnership. That's why Safe Foods came into play, is so that industry would have a license and have responsibilities to produce safe food. So I think, making sure that we can use our resources to the area of highest risk, that's a huge hurdle for us. And then just keeping up to speed with industry's advances. Technology is changing a lot, and trying to figure out how do we manage those technological changes. Like AI is the next thing, and what does that mean? Like, are we going to see preventive control plans that ChatGPT has written? I don't know. Is that a thing?
You already
Maybe?
have.
I have?
For sure.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely. All of those CPG importers that happen to import some food and have never talked to an inspector until this year,
ChatGPT.
probably.
Okay. All right. Great.
Here you go. Any other questions? I have a question. When the ERA model came out and the IRA model and the animal establishment risk assessment model came out, something that was really confusing for me was I sort of looked at the flow charts, and it indicated, these are the things that we use to assess how risky or how much risk is apportioned to a certain establishment, right? The volume of food they make, the type of commodity they work with. And then there are these multiplicative processes of, have they had a recall? Did they fail something in their PCP? Like, have they needed multiple interventions? And so I spent actually a good deal of time with the researchers at CFIA who built the model to try and understand the value apportioned to a recall that happened in the last 3 years versus 5 years, or what it means to have major issues flagged in an inspection and what that means for your risk assessment. I think for me that was really helpful in understanding how this assessment tool applies to establishments. I was wondering if you could speak to sort of that transparency at a more granular level of how these models work, because they're going to really impact a lot of my clients, a lot of people in this room.
So I'm not an expert on ERA,
Or IRA.
nor are our inspectors, but I think you probably talked to Romina, I would imagine. So she is the manager in our now science branch that is responsible with the model, and she has been very gracious with industry at any time, really, about sitting down and explaining how it works. Because industry is very interested. I can tell from other times where we've had presentations and knowing, okay, what do I need to do to try and get that risk level down? And for some things, like I will say for certain meat products, it's always going to be high because of trade, because of the nature of the product, all of those things. But I definitely think that's an opportunity to, we are very willing to sit down and have those conversations and connect her with any industry that wants to have it, or somebody from her team, because she's a very busy lady, especially with the importer risk model. But that level of transparency is what we're trying to promote, and it's just that at the local level, the inspectors may not always know who that person is.
Fabulous. I have a follow-on. Sorry, no, go ahead.
Hey there, Ron from Mortimer's Foods. We have a federal inspector on site every day, so if you're short, we're happy to share them occasionally.
Nice of you, thank you.
But, just putting that out there. This may not be directly in your neck of the woods, but one of the things I notice is with beef, they're properly labeled. By that I mean I can scan the label with a computer and it has a lot of information on it. It has a lot number, date of manufacturer, all the rest of it. All of our other food ingredients, I can't think of a single one that has proper labeling for traceability. It has a machine-printed lot code, but it's not machine readable. Is there anything underfoot or underway to bring the rest of the food industry into what the beef company has to do to make traceability work? Because we spent a lot of money to put traceability tools and our own labeling capabilities in, but it seems like none of the other industry has to do it.
Well, it's a little discouraging to hear on the one hand, just because the traceability rules are not new, and there are very basic requirements. If things are not going out to retail, then what they have to have on their label is obviously very different than what would have to have on it if it was going to a store shelf. However, it does need to have more. There's nothing in the regulations that require it to have to be, electronically scanned. But that's, I think, something I can take back to my colleagues in our programs and policy branch, just around how do we try and help industry with any best practices, or help. We have networks with different associations, so the companies that provide you with those ingredients, to try and get them to understand how it fits the business model that you're trying to accomplish. So there's nothing immediately on the horizon that I can point to, but I can take that back, and it's good information for me to know that that's a bit of a challenge for you.
Thank you.
I'll say, as an unsolicited lawyer, the pain that goes into a recall or nonconformity from an ingredients manufacturer in a recall assessment is far beyond anything that a public-facing company goes through. So if there's someone in this room that thinks about their packaging business to business and is wondering, is this truly traceable? Can we really map our lot codes? I would encourage you, from a regulatory and civil liability perspective, to really give that some critical thought. It's awful. So there's the unsolicited advice component of this too.
Well, hopefully the people, I don't know if there are ingredient providers here, but hopefully they're listening.
So I think we have time for one more question, Pam. And you've covered some of this in your presentation, but did you have to hit pause on any exciting projects during COVID that their time is coming now?
So I think some of the labeling modernization activities, the transition periods that we gave were much longer. Food labeling modernization as a whole was somewhat paused during the pandemic, because that was rough, for everybody in all aspects of life. And I remember the first year of the pandemic, I was still a director of a region, so we were just really focused on helping keep plants running, making sure we had inspectors who could be primarily at the meat processing and slaughter facilities, so that product could keep going and that the ports of entry stayed open. So, there was flexibility given to industry. I don't know if folks remember going to the grocery store during those times, but you would see, instead of going to the freezer aisle and all the fancy packaging, you saw the restaurant package of the giant bags of frozen vegetables that just basically said peas. We really tried to create some flexibility because we needed food to be available for people. It was very scary as a person to go to the grocery store and see empty shelves. That's not something you're used to seeing in Canada. So I think we did pause or slow down progress because we just felt like we were everybody dealing with enough. So now we have to kind of keep advancing and pick things back up, and that's why you're seeing some of the transitions that I talked about today.
Extraordinary. Pam, thank you so much for your time. You have our gratitude.
Nice to see you.
And look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Have a great conference.
All right.
Thanks.